The leather seat of the Gulfstream G650 creaked as Alicia Thorne, CEO of Vanguard Equity Partners, adjusted her position. At 42, she was one of the most powerful black women on Wall Street, known for her razor-sharp instincts and billion-dollar deals. The flight from New York to Dubai should have been routine, another business trip in her relentless schedule. But as the plane reached cruising altitude, everything changed. Two security officers approached her seat with purposeful strides. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," the lead officer said, his voice devoid of courtesy. Alicia's perfectly arched eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. The officer didn't blink. Random security check. Now. Before she could protest, they had her standing in the aisle, her Valentino heels barely touching the carpet as they marched her toward the front of the plane. The humiliation burned hot as other first-class passengers watched, some with open curiosity, others with barely concealed schadenfreude. A white male executive she recognized from Goldman Sachs smirked behind his champagne flute. The officers made a show of rifling through her designer handbag, spilling its contents across a vacant seat. "This is outrageous," Alicia hissed, her voice low but vibrating with anger. "Do you know who I am?" The lead officer smirked. "Doesn't matter who you are, ma'am. Rules are rules." As they escorted her off the plane during a layover in London, Alicia noticed the Skylinks Airways insignia on their uniforms. Her blood ran cold. Skylinks was Vanguard's biggest client, currently negotiating a $5 billion fleet modernization deal that she was personally overseeing. The pieces clicked into place with terrible clarity. This was no random check. Someone had orchestrated this very public humiliation to undermine her authority. Back in the private lounge, Alicia's hands shook as she dialed her COO. "Pull all our files on Skylinks," she said, her voice steel wrapped in silk. "Every contract, every email, every backroom deal." As she waited, she replayed the incident in her mind, the smug looks, the unnecessary roughness, the way they deliberately spilled her belongings. This wasn't just business. This was personal. And Alicia Thorne didn't get to where she was by letting slights go unanswered. The airline had made a fatal miscalculation. They thought humiliating her would make her compliant. Instead, they'd awaken something far more dangerous. A woman with nothing left to prove and everything to gain from revenge. The Vanguard headquarters buzzed with tension as Alicia stormed into the war room. Her executive team sat around the glass conference table, their faces a mix of anger and apprehension. "Tell me everything," Alicia demanded, shrugging off her cashmere coat. Her chief counsel, David Rosen, handed her a thick dossier. "It's worse than we thought," he said. "This wasn't just a power play, it was coordinated." Alicia pored over the documents, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Security footage showed Skylink's CFO Derek Voss in heated discussion with airline security chief Mark Henderson before her flight. Phone records revealed a flurry of calls between Voss and board members in the hours leading up to her random security check. The most damning evidence came from a whistleblower, an email from Voss to the board suggesting they remind Ms. Thorne who really holds the power in this relationship. "This is textbook coercion," Alicia murmured, tapping a manicured nail against the email printout. "They wanted to weaken my negotiating position before the final vote on the fleet deal." Her chief of security, a former Navy SEAL named James Carter, leaned forward. "We have options. Legal action would be messy, but no lawsuits." Alicia cut him off. Too slow, too public, and frankly too kind. A dangerous smile played at her lips as she turned to her CIO. "What's our exposure on the Skylinks deal?" The CIO didn't hesitate. $5.3 billion in committed capital. But the penalty clauses are ironclad. If they breach, we walk away with termination fees that would cripple their expansion plans. Alicia stood, pacing like a caged panther. "Good. Here's what we do." For the next hour, she outlined her plan with surgical precision. First, they would leak select details of the incident to friendly journalists. Second, they'd quietly begin divesting from Skylinks-related holdings. Third, and most crucially, they'd activate Project Siren, a contingency plan Alicia had insisted on including in all their major contracts. As her team dispersed to execute her orders, Alicia stared at the Manhattan skyline. The anger still simmered beneath her polished exterior, but now it had direction. Skylinks had tried to put her in her place. Soon, they would learn the hard way that Alicia Thorne didn't have a place, she made places, and right now, she was making a place for Skylinks in the corporate graveyard. The thought brought her no joy, only the cold satisfaction of a predator that had just spotted weakness in its prey. The game was afoot, and Alicia intended to win. Not just for herself, but for every woman of color who'd ever been made to feel small in a world of powerful men. This wasn't just business anymore, it was a reckoning. Alicia sat in her corner office, the New York skyline glittering beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The boardroom table before her was strewn with documents, legal briefs, financial disclosures, and damning internal memos from Skylinks. Her legal team had worked through the night, and now the hammer was about to drop. "Are we ready?" she asked, voice steady. Her general counsel nodded. "The breach of contract notice is drafted. The moment we file, Skylinks will have 12 hours to respond before the financial penalties trigger." Alicia's lips curled into a cold smile. "Good, but we're not just hitting them legally." She turned to her head of PR. "Leak the security footage to Bloomberg and CNBC. Let the world see what they did." Within minutes, the video of her forced removal was spreading like wildfire. Headlines blared. Black CEO dragged off Skylink's flight. Was it racial profiling? Airline faces backlash after humiliating top investor. By noon, Skylinks' stock had plummeted 15%. Board members were scrambling, issuing weak statements about regrettable misunderstandings. Alicia wasn't satisfied. She picked up her phone and dialed the CEO of Qatar Airways, Skylinks' biggest competitor. "Ahmed," she said smoothly, "remember that joint venture we discussed? Let's talk." The trap was set. The emergency Skylinks board meeting was chaos. CEO Gerald Holt gripped the podium, face slick with sweat as shareholders screamed for answers. Derek Voss, the CFO who had orchestrated Alicia's humiliation, sat stone-faced, but his fingers trembled around his pen. Then the doors swung open. Alicia strode in, flanked by her legal team. The room fell silent. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice cutting through the tension, "I believe we have a problem." She dropped a stack of documents on the table, contracts, emails, and most damning, a recording of Voss ordering security to put that woman in her place. Holt paled. "Alicia, surely we can know." Her voice was a whip crack. "You had two choices. Negotiate in good faith or play dirty. You chose wrong." She laid out her terms. Voss's immediate resignation, a public apology, delivered by Holt on live television. Vanguard's stake, converted to controlling shares. The board erupted in protest until Alicia slid forward one final document. A signed term sheet with Qatar Airways. "If you refuse," she said softly, "I walk, and I take $5 billion with me." The room went dead silent. One by one, the board members folded. Derek Voss's resignation hit the wires at 8 a.m. the next morning. Alicia watched from her office as the news broke. CNBC ran a cheer-in. Skylink's CFO steps down amid scandal. Her phone buzzed, an email from Holt begging for a meeting. She deleted it. Instead, she called her COO. "Begin transferring our assets out of Skylinks' operating fund. Slowly. I want them to feel it." By midday, rumors swirled that Skylinks was struggling to meet payroll. Employees took to LinkedIn expressing outrage. Passenger bookings cratered. And then the final blow. The Department of Transportation announced an investigation into Skylinks' discriminatory practices. Alicia leaned back in her chair, sipping her espresso. Phase 1 was complete. 1 month later, Alicia returned to the Skylinks headquarters, this time as the newly appointed chairwoman. The boardroom was tense as she took her seat at the head of the table. The remaining executives avoided her gaze. "Let's begin," she said, opening her portfolio. Her first motion, a complete overhaul of Skylinks' security protocols. Her second, a $50 million diversity initiative, her third, terminating all contracts with the security firm involved in her removal. The votes passed unanimously. After the meeting, Holt cornered her in the hallway. "Was this always your plan?" he asked, voice hollow. Alicia adjusted her blazer. "No, Gerald. But you should know. I always finish what others start." She left him standing there, staring at the wreckage of his career. The press called it the most brutal corporate revenge in aviation history. Alicia's face graced the cover of Forbes, the woman who grounded Skylinks and walked away with $5 billion. At Vanguard's annual gala, she stood before her employees, champagne flute in hand. "A year ago," she said, "someone tried to humiliate me to gain leverage. Today we own them." The room erupted in applause. Later, as she stepped onto her private jet, a newly acquired Gulfstream with the Vanguard logo emblazoned on the tail, the pilot nodded respectfully. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Thorne." She smiled. No one would ever drag her off a plane again.